here, let me remark about a couple of things. First of all, you see I've got my cell phone here, and I haven't turned it on. I got it on buzz, but I haven't turned it off, so there's no clock, so I need to watch my time, and I'll be looking at it. So I know you all have your smartphones, and if you haven't read about my bio carefully, you'll see there's a couple of mentions in there of things I did in government related to the intelligence community. And I have a number of friends at the National Security Agency. You know, that's the place out in Maryland where they have all the computers that are tracking all our phone calls and everything, right? So I called up a couple of friends and I said, could you readjust the satellite just for about 45 minutes this morning so it's covering Prairie Meadows. And so if any of you are checking your email or texting or instant messaging or whatever, that I'm going to know. And I will be sending and telling names to the principal's office. So anyway, that's not really true. So I'm glad to be here. You heard about my awards from the American Foreign Service Association, and I'm very, very proud of those. I'm the only State Department officer to ever win it 3 times. And just so it's clear, the American Foreign Service Association is the collective bargaining agent of the State Department. So I don't know how many of you are, but I'm a union member. I've been paying my union dues for 44 years and on that. And so I'm very proud that my fellow officers gave me those honors. I'm here next week. We've got Tony Blair is going to be here, the President of Iceland, Cardinal Peter Turkson are all going to be at the World Food Prize. I'm going to endeavor to be a diplomat and be gracious. Of that, there's 1,100 people showing up from 70 countries on that. But I would say, in terms of the future, there's probably not any more important address than this one. And I'll explain why. I first want to introduce my colleague and staff member, Catherine Swoboda. Catherine, stand up here for a second. Catherine is the youngest alumni of Iowa State University ever to be chosen as the outstanding young alumna of that school. She is, unlike me, a scientist. She has advanced degrees in agronomy. She's written papers on soybean sudden death syndrome. I mean, who knew, right? And she is the director of our Iowa Youth Institute. And she's also here because I'm old and not technically proficient, and I can't speak and change slides at the same time, so she's here. So I want to begin because I'm sure many of you are teaching government and civics and that. And so just imagine for a second if you were taking your class to Washington, planning all for a year, all going there, and there you are in Washington, D.C., and nothing's open. And what am I going to do with all the students? You're walking them around, and you walk over in front of the White House. And you stand there and peering through the fence and looking there and wondering what's going on inside. And I worked there for a couple of years, so I kind of know what's going on inside. But you're there. And then you turn around and you look at the beautiful park across the street. Lafayette Park. Right? Statues there are of those foreigners who came and helped us win our independence. And to show our gratitude, they have this enormous place of honor. And if you look at the statue of Lafayette there, and his horse, and, it's a beautiful photo of the White House in the background. Here's the real story and the significance of this. How did Lafayette get here? Because Louis XVI had a real thing for the British. And anything he could do to undercut them, he wanted to do. And so he took a huge amount of money and invested it in Lafayette coming to North America and on our side. And it worked. because he hadn't invested the money and put it towards his own country's agricultural development. And bread was scarce and unbelievably expensive. And the women bread merchants in the central market in Paris picked up and went to Versailles, stormed into the palace, running up and down the halls looking for Louis and Marie Antoinette, and forced them back to Paris, and eventually onto the guillotine. The monarchy tumbled. The French Republic and democracy was born. In my Laureate's building, and I really hope you'll come and bring your students, and we're open and see the educational exhibits. And there's an agricultural timeline, and it traces from the very first time, 11,000 years ago, that a human being, and almost certainly a woman, farmer, went out and planted that first seed till today. And I had to determine the 35 or so most important events. And there's a big picture of the French Revolution, because the linkages between the political science that I studied and the agronomy that Catherine studied is the key to understanding what's happened in the past, and the key to whether we are going to be able to overcome what I identify as the single greatest challenge human beings have ever faced, whether we can sustainably feed, I should have put sustainably in the slide, the 9 billion people who will be on our planet in the year 2050. Preventing nuclear war, eradicating cancer. You can think of, I'm sure you talk about, the great challenges human beings have faced. But I would suggest to you that I've looked at all of these, and I'm convinced that we have, as a species, never before confronted a challenge like this. Now, I came to this and being involved in food and agriculture in a really indirect way. You heard that I went to Loras College in Dubuque, and Dan and I were talking about being Duhawks, and I went there, I was going to be a chemical engineer. You know, most of my school life I went to buildings built in the 19th century, but in Dubuque they built a brand new high school, Waller High. I was a senior there. They had all these labs. I took several sciences, and I was the top science student. I thought, wow, this is where my life's going. Then I got to Father Dolter's first year chemistry class, and he had all this math on the board. I'm grabbing the catalog. Where else can I go? And I ended up in political science and government. And I grew up in the time of John Kennedy. He had talked about maybe he'd be a diplomat, and so I thought, wow, that'd be great, and all you had to do was take a test. And so I took the Foreign Service exam, hoping that I would somehow pass, but what are the odds? 18,000 people take the test, maybe 1,000 pass. In the end, maybe 200 get selected. So, we're often critical of government inefficiency, and rightly so. But every once in a while it's a good thing, because I'm sure somebody mixed up my test scores with some other guy, and I got in. So here I'm driving to Washington, D.C., and I'm going, the visions of diplomatic sugar plums are dancing in my head. I'd be going to London or Paris, because in Paris they still got those chandelier ballrooms, even though they don't have the king anymore, or Vienna, and I'd be sipping aperitifs. And it was 1968. I was under 26, so I was eligible for the draft. I had never been married, and so I'm before I knew what happened, they're training me in Vietnamese, and I'm on a small plane landing on a back dirt road in the Mekong Delta. And they said if you stay there for 18 months and do your job and be quiet, we'll have a good assignment for you. In fact, we're going to send you to Harvard and train you in labor specialty. And so I thought, all right. And then it's there in the Mekong Delta that I met this guy, Norman Borlaug. Actually, I didn't really meet him. He wasn't there. But what I met was the incredible green revolution that he had produced. I don't know if you know Norman Borlaug, I don't know if you teach about him in your class, but I know this. When I came back after I retired from the State Department in 1999, I used to talk to groups of students, 30, 40 high school students. And I'd always start by asking, who's heard of Norman Borlaug? Maybe one or two hands would go up at most. Usually kids who were in 4-H or FFA or their parents were in farming or something, and they knew Borlaug. And but Borlaug is this amazing story. Born on a farm in 1914 outside Cresco, goes to high school there as a high school wrestler, and I actually wanted to be a science teacher. That was his first plan, and he was going to go to Iowa State Teachers College, as I guess it was called then. And instead, one of his neighbors said, come on, go up to Minnesota with me. They're looking for people to be on the football team. He ended up being a wrestler. And when I go up there to Minnesota, I say, you know, you guys stole Norman Borlaug from us in Iowa. You're just like you stole Brett Favre from the Green Bay Packers. So they all laugh. But here Borlaug goes there, he gets a PhD in plant pathology, goes to Mexico, spends 2 decades working with the poorest farmers in the most remote parts of Mexico, and in the early 1960s develops miracle wheat that will be triple the yield and will resist disease. And at the beckoning of the UN, rushes to India and Pakistan and convinces the leaders of both governments. Remember how critical governmental leadership is in all of this. This theme you hear again and again. Convinces them to change the whole approach to agriculture, and those 2 countries facing imminent mass famine and starvation changed the situation completely. Hundreds of millions are saved. Borlaug's called the father of the Green Revolution, which is launched, gets the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 for that. And his approach to wheat is adapted to rice, and it shows up in Vietnam, out in those villages where I'm working. And I learned the lesson of my life that's been the central core of all that I've done. And I learned it this way. I had 8 villages that I worked with. And our job was to help defeat the Viet Cong insurgents through development, through making life better. And we were doing several different things, doing some things in education, building schools, but we were upgrading the old French farm to market road that went through all 8 villages. And we'd gotten about 4 villages covered. The road went through the first 4. When the new miracle rice, it's called IR8 rice, arrived. And we had agricultural advisors going out and urging farmers to start using it. And they did. And the transformation of the villages was stunning, as it was immediate. In just a year or 2, you could see the dramatic impact, because now farmers could get 2 crops of rice and a crop of melons. Trucks could come in on the road and haul the crops off to the big markets, the capital city. And as a result, you could see people's houses get better. They'd have a stronger roof to keep the rain out. They'd be better dressed. Their kids are better dressed. The kids look more well-nourished. And in those villages, the Viet Cong seemed to melt away, to evaporate. What we hadn't been able to achieve with B-52s and boots on the ground, the combination of roads and rice had that effect. You got to the end of the road where we were fixing it, you went over to the next villages, and they were unchanged. Nobody was using it. There wasn't any sign that said no IRA rice here. Was it used? No. Children were still dying at a high rate because their moms couldn't get them out to school. And the Viet Cong were as strong as ever. Now it's a simple lesson. I mean, this just happened not by any design of our program, it just happened. That we were doing the two things at the same time. The Green Revolution came there. And I carried away from it what should have been apparent to me from growing up in Iowa. Because that's how our state was transformed. Yes, it was Iowa State University and the wonderful extension workers. Yes, it was Henry Wallace in developing hybrid corn. But if it hadn't been for those governors and legislators who committed the money to building all those roads that crisscross our state, it wouldn't be what it is today. Because that's how kids got to all the schools that you teach at. That's how the buses went out to get them. That's how those farmers got their crops to market. You know, right? There were insurrections in Iowa in the 1930s. And building the roads is what transformed this. It's what's transformed every society. From the Silk Road to the Royal Road to Roman roads, the Appian Way. It's the roads and the knowledge that travel over it. Now, I know travel's on the cell phones and the smartphones and the internet now, but without the roads, you're not going to get there. So that's how I met Norman Borlaug and knew of him. But then in 1999, when it was time for me to retire, and I should add, as ambassador to Cambodia, I had to deal with 25,000 Khmer Rouge, the single greatest genocidal mass murdering organization of the second half of the 20th century. And the Vietnamese army had tried for a decade, so the North Vietnamese army, to get rid of them in Cambodia and couldn't do it. And they gave up and went home. We showed up at $11 million. Sounds like a lot, but it's not very much in foreign. And I said, go into Thailand, get all the road grading equipment you can, bring it in and start grading roads and sending agricultural technology out to those villages. And 9 years later, the last Khmer Rouge surrendered. Now, lots of factors involved. You study social science, social studies, you know that it's not just one thing, but this was at the heart of it. That's how we destroyed the greatest mass murdering organization, the latter half of the 20th century. So I came home to Iowa to take over the World Food Prize, and the thing to remember was that Norman Borlaug said this: food's the moral right of all who are born into this world. That's what motivates us. That's what underlies the World Food Prize that I run. The World Food Prize is a shared vision between Norman Borlaug and John Ruan. Norman Borlaug created the World Food Prize in 1986 because he wanted it to be the Nobel Prize for Food and Agriculture. He wanted to inspire great achievements in increasing the quality, quantity, and availability of food. John Ruan, also born in 1914 in a small town in Iowa, built this big trucking empire, biggest in America, and he wanted Des Moines in Iowa to be the food and agricultural capital of the world. So I showed up to take the job. They said, hey, your job is just make our dreams come true. So I picked up my phone, dialed the State Department and said, how can I unretire? This is mission impossible. Well, they of course weren't taking me back. and I didn't really do that. And, but I've been endeavoring ever since. When I started, I had one other employee. Now I have 10, but 50 people came from outside Iowa for a one-day event. Next week, the World Food Prize will go on all week. And this is what our mission is, this is what we endeavor to strive to fulfill. And we give a $250,000 prize. We have the incredible privilege of doing it at the state capitol. And our winners, our laureates, come from all around the globe. And they come from a vast array of different achievements. We have people who run the biggest emergency relief program in history, the UN World Food Program. We have amazing scientists who are doing things in rice and sorghum. We have food technologists doing this, and we will be next Thursday, so if you can't watch because you're watching the football game that night, TiVo it, and on IPTV, you'll be able to see live our Laureate Award ceremony from the state capitol. We have this incredible privilege. We will be there giving our prize in this pomp-filled ceremony. Looks like I've been to the Nobel Prize. Ours is better, but you know, when I'm from Iowa, we can't say stuff like that. And that. So then, at the same time, we have going on the Borlaug Dialogue, and we have speakers coming from all around the world. It's going to be webcast. So just go to worldfoodprize.org. And you know, so if you're doing something educational, you can put it on the screen in your classroom. The students can be watching, and you can be checking your cell phones or catching up on things. So don't put that in the official record. That's and that. I was a teacher for a while, so I understand. And that. But we're so proud of the fact that we will pack the ballroom at the Marriott Hotel. It'll be to overflow because we have this amazing array of speakers that show up. Bill Gates gave his first ever speech on agriculture at the World Food Prize because he called and he didn't personally call. They called and asked if we had room for him. He wanted to give his first speech, and he wanted to do it at the World Food Prize in Des Moines because Gates folks who had come said we met a more diverse array of people at the World Food Prize in Des Moines than any other conference we go to anywhere in the world. They said, so Mr. Gates wants to do this at your forum. You have, could you please invite him? And I said, oh, gee, if only you called a couple of weeks earlier. I didn't do that. We had the Secretary General of the United Nations here, Ban Ki-moon, Kofi Annan was also here. We have CEOs of big companies. We have smallholder farmers. I have a pastoralist coming next week who raises animals in remote parts of Africa. I don't know where else things like that are happening. But Dr. Borlaug's most important legacy was the next generation. That's you, the individuals you deal with. And we endeavor to inspire that next generation through our educational programs. And this is what I want to leave you with. The Iowa Youth Institute that Catherine runs is aimed at bringing, our goal is to have a student and a teacher come from every high school in the state. And to be part of that, we're going to do it next year in May. I'm not sure we picked the date. Is it 5th?
No, April.
April next year? So we moved it from May to April. It's a good thing I checked. Yeah. Are we on the 15th?
14th.
Huh? 14th. So I didn't have the month or the day right. So you see why it's important. And April 14th. So this will be here. Students come after writing a paper on a topic. We want schools to, you come up with your own way of doing this, but choose a student and send a student from your school along with a teacher and come and spend the day. I promise you, they'll come back raving about the experience, and you will be able to, in fact, involve every student in your school in this process. A process that addresses both the issues of agriculture and food production and relates to STEM and that, but also the social studies and social science side of it. Students get to interact with leading professors. And then about 80 of them from Iowa, from 8 schools, get to come to our Global Youth Institute. So next week, I'm going to have all these big hitters here, Tony Blair and there, and in the room are going to be 150 high school students from 27 U.S. states and territories, from 5 or 6 foreign countries, and a special delegation of Chinese students from Xizhuang High School in Hebei. This is Iowa's sister state, province. We're going to be here. And we give these students at our Global Youth Institute a remarkable experience. Here they get to hear President Lula da Silva of Brazil speak to them. They get to greet and shake hands with the Secretary General. And they get to be eligible to go and become a Borlaug International intern, as Catherine did. So Catherine's from East High in Des Moines. Not usually thought of as an agricultural school, because it isn't. Not many kids there with the agricultural background, as she doesn't have. And sent her off to Brazil when she was about, what, 16 or so. And for 8 weeks working at the leading Brazilian research center, and had a transformative impact on her life. This year, I have 22 of those students. I've sent them to Nepal, Tanzania, Ethiopia, China, India, Brazil, Mexico, Philippines, and it is the crown jewel of the Iowa high school experience, and really of the American high school experience. And most of the superstars, I'd say 2/3 to 3/4, are young women. We have a program that draws young women into science and agriculture and inspire them to care about the environmental issues that our planet faces. Next week, our prize is being given to the 3 founders of agricultural biotechnology. They are amazing people who have done incredible things to learn how you can take traits from one crop and do what took Norman Borlaug 2 decades to do it in a year in a laboratory with profound impact. And the future is this: climate volatility. You know, get into arguments about climate change or not. I want to be practical. Every farmer in this state and every farmer everywhere knows now, one year it may be drought, next year it may be floods. If you live near a coast, it could be saltwater intrusion from the seas rising. You better be able to counter that if we're going to deal with and confront the greatest challenge that human beings have ever faced. Can we have enough food to feed all of these people who are going to be on our planet in another 30 years, 37 years? Tony Blair is going to be here, the President of Iceland, Cardinal Peter Turkson from the Vatican, an array of speakers. It'll be fascinating. So I told you about what Dr. Borlaug's dream was. My dream is that we can build the Iowa Youth Institute into what he always hoped. Because of all the things, all the laureates we deal with, all the issues, all the presidents he met, the thing he cared most about was the students who showed up at our Global Youth Institute every year. He was a teacher at heart, like all of you. So here's the deal. Here's what I'm looking to you for. Next Wednesday, October 16th, is World Food Day. It's also, in Iowa, Norman Borlaug World Food Prize Day. All the history of our state, there's only 2 days of recognition for an individual ever enacted. One for Herbert Hoover, who was president, and who's, in my view, the single greatest humanitarian in the history of the United States of America, because he took food, while working for a Democrat, took food to Europe to feed 800 or 900 million people. Not many people know that either. Well, I'm sure all of you do. And that. But the other day, October 16th, is for Norman Borlaug. It ought to be a day when every one of your schools, something happens, so students are told about his history, that he's the man who saved more lives than any other person who's ever lived, that of all the NC2A athletes who have ever played any sport at any level since the first sport was played whenever, in terms of life achievements, he's the greatest NC2A athlete. And he's our state's greatest hero. And it's my great privilege that to be the chairman appointed by the governor to pick the artist and raise the money. I've done both. To create the statue of Norman Borlaug that will be unveiled next March 25th, the 100th anniversary of his birth, in the U.S. Capitol. Because on a bipartisan vote in our state legislature, where the Democrats and Republicans can't agree on very much, in one day they passed the bill putting Dr. Borlaug's statue in the U.S. Capitol. I don't know what your politics is. I don't have any politics. I don't do anything political. Because Dr. Borlaug is the one person I know of, and ours is the one institution I know of, that can have Bruce Braley and Dave Loebsack, and Tom Latham and Steve King, and Chuck Grassley and Tom Harkin, all be in the same picture with Governor Branstad and Governor Vilsack and Governor Culver, because they all believe Dr. Borlaug's our state's greatest hero, and he can be that inspiration. So my hope is that you'll make sure that all students know who Dr. Borlaug is when they graduate from your school at whatever level. My hope is that you're willing to do your part in ensuring that Norman Borlaug's dream comes true. That there could be an event every year in every school in this state. His dream, of course, is in every state, every school in America. But you know, we lead the nation, and we certainly can do it in this. That there will be a way that every student writes a paper, that you choose who's your Borlaug scholar, you send them to Iowa State, and that you will inspire those students to be part of our effort as a school, as a community, as a state, as a country, to overcome that single greatest challenge human beings have ever faced. It's not just up to the scientists. They're so important. We got to build the roads and governments and that will, however they decide, take this on or not take it on, with whatever the consequences will be. And after all, I think in the end, to me, teachers are to impart knowledge and to inspire students. And your 18-year-olds, seniors in high school, will be 55 in 2050. And then they'll know, and you'll know, whether we succeeded or not. So thanks for having me. We've got, a few minutes left. If you want me to answer questions, I will. If you want me to get out of the way so you can have coffee, I'm happy to do that too. But it's been a privilege to be here. And as I said, I really meant it. There's no more important talk I give these 2 weeks than this one here today.